What is your message to the world?
I grew up in Miami, Florida. I did a couple of rebellious things from my family's point of view, like spend nights alone in the Everglades with no idea what would happen to me. I'll tell you what happens to you. You get bit by mosquitoes
Yeah.
so badly you remember it the rest of your life. I mean, I was covered with mosquito bites and poison ivy. But I did that. I did that to see what it was. I really found out what it was. I also had the opportunity, because my stepfather was a doctor who owned some property in the Keys, to go to wild places in the Florida Keys. It's really something to be a kid in tourist culture and go out in a boat of your own, not guided, and get off a boat and walk in mangrove water up to your knees and waist. That's something everybody should do.
Neat. That's neat.
That's a baptism.
Yeah.
Because those places are crawling with life. Just crawling.
Yeah.
And it was a real education.
We as a species need wild places because we are animals, because we are part of the continuity of nature ourselves. We have a tendency to be able to remove ourselves from consciousness of that very easily. I mean, we're sitting on the rocks right now, but we could be walking on the sidewalk. Walking on the sidewalk is a human-created environment, and we as a species are able to create all kinds of alternative environments. But we will always be part of the interdependence of the planetary biosphere. We'll always be connected to other plants and animals by our natural functions. The fact that we eat, that we breathe, that we create wastes, that we exercise, that we sweat, that we make love, that we have children, all of those things are the way we participate with other animals on the planet. And we need wild places to remind us of our heritage, and not our past, not our animal past, our animal present, our animal future. We're on the same footing as hawks, bears, caterpillars, worms, algae, bacteria. We're all the same thing. That's why we need wild places.
I was working to make a living. I bluffed, I told a lie. I said that I had 12 hours of statistics. I don't think anybody had 12 hours of statistics. It was so attractive to the person that hired me. They'd never seen it. Also, I'd been in the Army, and in the Army I'd told a similar lie and gotten away with it, which ended up being much to my benefit because they didn't want to send me into combat or anything if they could use me some other way. So I got plucked out of wherever I was stationed at the time and put into this unit to study morale. And they actually moved me around the country giving these tests to people. It was laughable. The one benefit was we never had to do anything. We didn't have to shine our shoes or any of that military crap. We could just show up and with our shirts hanging out. And they would say, "Oh, you're the psychology people." Yeah, that's right. I was involved with civil rights, very radical black activists. I was part of a support group for the Newark uprising. There were musicians who were involved with it, painters, poets. I took a bus to Detroit and then took buses and hitchhiked to Puget Sound. Worked for a while on Whidbey Island and jumped a freight in Portland. Took a freight train and came over Mount Shasta at night, moonlight. And the train slows down around Dunsmuir because, well, the grade is incredible. So the train was going 2-3 miles an hour walking. And I remember getting out of the hole in the lumber. This was a freight, it wasn't a boxcar. It's a freight carrying lumber. And they keep a hole in the middle for sliding. And you can be in that. Of course, you don't want to get slid. You know, you don't want the lumber to squash you. So you had to be aware of what was going on. But it didn't move while I was in it. And I remember getting out and being able to grab an icicle off the side of a rock and jump back on the train. And got off in the Emeryville, Albany, freight yard, Albany, Berkeley. And lived in Berkeley for a while with friends, kind people. I got a job with the city of San Francisco, as a statistician of some sort. Same line. And then one day walked into the meme troupe and told them that I was an actor, director, and writer.
Was that a lie? Or true?
No, I'm an actor. I'm an actor inside.
The original vision of the meme troupe was to be a populist, radical theater. But the people involved with it gradually became more politicized from the early 60s to the middle 60s. And during that course, the theater's purpose became to foment social change in any way possible.
First job I had with the meme troupe was to take a play of Giordano Bruno's from the 16th century and convert it into a play that would bring up issues of property and ownership and privacy. And that play, by the time we mounted it, we didn't have a park permit to perform it. So the word got out that the first production of it would be busted by the police for performing in the parks without a license. We thought it was time to break public consciousness and identify ourselves as people that would take those risks. So we wanted it to be busted. The theater of it being busted was wonderful. You know, there were paddy wagons, there were cops everywhere, dragging an actor away, and don't let them take him, and what about free speech, on and on. What about art? What about San Francisco's reputation? We had all of that to look forward to. I wouldn't have missed it for the world.
Somebody's always trying to turn these into a goddamn farce. Right. Now, come on. All right. This is serious.
The Diggers began as theater. They were a continuation of the meme troupe idea of having free theater in the park. The next remove from free theater in the park was to have theater that people didn't know was theater. It was called guerrilla theater, and it meant putting a play that was previously concocted in the midst of a situation where no one expected a play to be, and having people relate to it as reality. So we set down a play where American MPs drilled prisoners of war. It was a play of mine called Center Man, but we dropped it into the free speech movement rally at Sproul Plaza in Berkeley. People thought that the MPs beating the prisoners in that play were real, but people didn't know it was a play, and they were yelling, "Stop beating those people." So that was guerrilla theater, to inject theater into a social situation to cause a reaction from the people involved. Well, the next step from that was to life act. In other words, to carry out behaviors that were idealized behavior of what should be. And the Diggers were a theater of what should be. And there were two tenets to the Digger phenomena. Everything is free, and do your own thing.
Minds are up for grabs. It's up for grabs. Civilization's up for grabs. I think everybody knows it.
The street theater that we had been doing was now going to be acted out as an alternative society where food, shelter, entertainment was going to be free without ideology. We were looking for the people driving by, going to work, who would see people gathered in the park eating food, provoke their idea of what they were doing by going to work. The first time we made food in the park, the place where we made it was near the Haight-Ashbury, but we chose the place because in the morning and afternoon, cars went by of people going to work. So we not only made a dairy can, milk can full of stew and served it free to people, but we did it inside a frame that was 12 feet by 12 feet, a very big frame. You know, a frame this size, painted orange. So you couldn't miss it. You could not miss this thing. So if you were in a car, what you saw was a painting of people in the park having free food. And the reason we did this was because John Cage had said, if you put a frame around anything, it is art. And because we said that when you did things free, you were doing it in a free frame of reference.
What creep is that, sir?
This one.
Which creep? Which one? Me?
The guitar player.
The guitar player?
Yes.
He's a creep?
He's a creep.
Why is he a creep? Because he
has to work.
Free work.
He's not working. You're not working. Nobody.
Are you working?
I'm a welfare.
I was against the war in Vietnam because the war supported the ideas that I wanted changed, ideas about what society was about. The quintessential moment of all of this was when a paratrooper walked into the free store, took some clothes off the rack and went to the changing room and came out and put his uniform on the rack and walked out in a tie-dyed shirt and a pair of pants that he found in a free store. That's what I wanted.
Fitzgerald Kennedy, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Senator Robert Francis Kennedy, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, the 3 civil rights workers, the Texas Tower Massacre, the murder of 8 nurses in Chicago. How long must the list grow? You know, giving advice ceremoniously to the young is as foolish as giving it to the old, although not so cruel. After all, such advice is impersonal to both.
For most people, it was very confusing because so much activity had gone into creating the diggers that they didn't know what to do next. And people were asking me, what should we do now? And I said, what would you like to do? Meaning, let's go on and decide what the next evolutionary step will be. And for some people, it meant going to the country. For some people, it meant dropping out of the digger thing and being on drugs for a long period of time. For some people, it was to make a caravan and go across the country spreading the digger idea. What happened, though, over time was that the people that kept doing it became a large family. And as a family, they began supporting each other. That group of people was a couple of hundred.
Well, I've always been interested in human ecology. And human ecology, of course, is to relate to basic human needs: food, shelter, energy, materials. And while we were doing the diggers in San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury, the idea of being connected with the land became very obvious because we were going out to farms and gleaning fields to bring in potatoes, tomatoes, onions, to feed the people that were coming into San Francisco for what was called the hippie rebellion. Well, I think we fed probably at the most about 100,000 people, and fed them from farms that we brought people to and harvested food, etc. It became very obvious that human beings need water, energy, food, etc. And that if you want to start society over again, you'd have to start with those considerations.
And when people began moving into these rural places to be one with nature, to begin an ideal society based on the principles of joy, freedom, love, natural food, etc., they ran smack into local ecologies. How can we do this? How can we grow our own food? What's the kind of energy that we should be using? How should we cook? What food should we eat? How should we have children? How should we raise our children? How should we cure ourselves of diseases? And these all had to do with local places, which is what struck me immediately. The hippie commune Black Bear Ranch was in the Siskiyou Mountains, where the winter is about 6 months long. Altitude is several thousand feet. It snowed in during the winter. I spent a snowed-in winter at Black Bear Ranch. We were down to our own resources. So ecology ideas became very prominent. My own dissatisfaction with the situation was that we were isolated. And in that isolation, without any sort of reciprocity with other people like ourselves, we became very ingrown. So I feared that not a lot would come out of it unless people could relate to each other better. So it became interesting to me to formulate an idea that we could use as a common basis, even if we were in backwoods rural communes. What could be a common basis for people who had been through the 60s together to keep the spirit of that still alive? And because of that, I and a number of other people traveled across the country and made videotape of other communal groups and brought tapes from one group to the other. I called it Home Skin, Video Pony Express. And it was effective. People would see other groups and say, oh, they're just like we are. I'm talking about from Vancouver, Canada to southern Nevada to Colorado, Pennsylvania, New York. Eventually ended up in Maine, and in Maine decided to go to Nova Scotia, talked to a poet friend there about the idea of bioregions, meaning natural geographies that people live in. Went to the UN Environment Conference in Stockholm.
The 1972 Environment Conference in Stockholm, Sweden, the first environmental conference. There were 10,000 people there that were in the streets who had come from all over the planet. I called them the planetariat, had shown up to demonstrate that they wanted to identify with the planetary biosphere, with life on Earth. But they weren't allowed in any of the meetings. The meetings were of representatives of nation states. So as a result, we had to think of a way to think of our place and where we lived in ecological terms, that we were really citizens of that ecological place. And that's where the idea of a bioregion came from.
Planet Drum is an ecological educational group that was founded to think of ways to harmonize human society with natural processes of the planet. In the middle 70s, the idea of a bioregion was created by the ecologist Raymond Dassman and myself to mean a geographic area that is continuous in natural terms, has the same plants and animals, landforms, watersheds, and is a natural unit for people to think of as a whole.
I think Planet Drum's origins lay in frustration. And the frustration was whether or not the environmental movement would ever really result in anything. From a certain point of view, environmentalism, if I can just be short and brutal about it, with keeping the styrofoam cups off the lawn. But whether or not the cups should be there in the first place or the lawn should be there is really the big question. Whether or not our society is an ecologically centered society or whether everything it does is against the environment. So environmentalism seemed to be largely operating an emergency room without having a maternity ward. So environmental despoilation isn't getting less as a result of the environmental movement. It's getting more as a result of what industrial society is doing. So there has to be a different approach to living on this planet together if we intend to preserve it or preserve inhabitability for humans and other species. And the frustration was that there didn't seem to be a way to do it at the time.
And that time was 1974.
The early 70s.
The idea of a bioregion as a place we all share is like a free zone. And the idea that bioregions should have their own government is autonomous. That decentralization of government is a better idea ecologically is very much like the Digger idea that you should do your own thing where you live. So for me, the whole Digger sentiment has gone into an ecological sentiment where people are part of the place where they live. People are part of nature, and nature is the subject.
One of the shortcomings of environmentalism was that, by and large, the major events on the planet were always happening someplace else, like whales. Now, very few people see whales, but whales were a major consideration. Rainforests are a major consideration. Cutting down a forest someplace in a very remote area was, you know, what people should be concerned about. Whereas the way we live in the places that we inhabit now is destroying those places. We're polluting the water, we're filling landfills with lethal, well, I don't think they've ever done a test to find out what happens with a full baby diaper made out of plastic, cadmium battery, and a grapefruit half. Put those together, wrap them up, stick them in the ground for 50 years. I don't think any scientist has done a test to see what would result from that. So we don't know what black lagoons are waiting out there to leach out their poisons. And it's just the way we live in places that are destroying them. And if we can't save the places where we live, how are we ever going to save the whales? You follow the connection there? So the bioregional approach is, what do you do about this saying, think globally but act locally? Well, what you do is you begin to understand the place where you live and try to work for the kinds of activities that will harmonize with natural elements in that place. And in that way, perhaps we can save the biosphere by saving the parts. If we save the parts, maybe we can save the whole. Our approach is non-hierarchical, and we think of ourselves as facilitative. In other words, Planet Drum doesn't ever intend to have franchises for bioregional chapters. What we believe is that people will find out more about the places where they live, will develop forms to harmonize with those places and protect them, and that when they do that, they'll be able to relate to other people who are doing the same thing. So it's the approach that we're involved with. And if I led a workshop somewhere, it would be to help people understand the natural elements of the place where they live in not a particularly scientific way, but in a holistic way. What are the native plants and animals here? What are the unique soils? What is the specific climate of this place? What is the watershed that you live in? Probably the most important element of relating to natural systems is the watershed that you live in. Where does your food come from? Where does it go? Where does the water come from? Where does it go? How do you interact with it? So that people begin to think, oh, there are certain things we probably shouldn't do here. We probably shouldn't have a nuclear reactor, definitely, but probably we should think about renewable energy that's specific to the place where we live. For example, in the southwestern desert, water power is unthinkable. There's no water. But in the Cascade Range of North America on the Pacific coast, especially say the Olympic Peninsula where it rains 200 inches a year, then falling water as a source of power is very thinkable, very doable. So the kinds of energy that people use, the sort of food that they grow or eat, the kind of materials they use, the kinds of houses they build, are all really determined by the place where they live. And if you take a bioregional point of view about it, you either harmonize with the place and can live there for what the Native Americans in this area used to say was 7 generations. Don't make any decision unless it's good for 7 generations of time. Either you'll live harmoniously with the place or you'll destroy it. You know, there's really no middle ground. There's only treading water of a person that's essentially going to drown. There's no place else for us to go. We are where we live. Sometimes people react to that and say, oh yeah, but I wasn't born here. Well, very often people that are born in a place don't know more about it than someone that takes a bioregional perspective and goes out to find these things. So you can be born native rather than native born. Do you follow what I'm saying? You can understand that you are being carried by the area where you live, by your bioregion, even if you weren't born there. So that's the way that we try to apply these ideas, and those are the things that we can facilitate.
My name is Peter Berg. I'm the director of Planet Drum Foundation in San Francisco for 35 years. We've been promoting the idea of bioregions, and that's what we're talking about today. What is a bioregion? How do you recognize bioregional characteristics? And what do you do about it? How does this consciousness actually end up informing action? There is a tremendous need to not only transform our consciousness about the relationship of people to nature, but to actually begin living a different kind of life that is geared toward blending with nature.
See these neat kids behind me? They look like they're hanging out tough. They seem to have a certain level of innocence that's really charming.
Yay!
Hello!
Yeah.
Hello! I am Japanese girl.
レーシングカンパニー3代目 B モダン総長01警棒です。よろしく。I
am Japanese girl.
何を言うとんねん。
Gaijin girl. Gaijin girl.
Color contact.
Oh, sorry, Japanese girl.
Japanese girl.
All right.
How much old are you?
なんで待って言うとんねん。なんで金やねん。あなたいくらですかって。
I am 18.
No.
はい。
18.
80
Here, in my heart.
T.
Heart.
Heart.
何を言うとんねん。
気持ちは
Heart is young.
何を言うとんねん。
18って言ってるやん。
Hi, that's pretty good English.
気持ちは18って言ってる。
That is good English. Heart is young. Heart is young.
心は子供です。
Heart
I am American.
Is young. Good English.
English.
みんな
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Whoa, thank you.
Thank you.
Domo.
Goodbye.
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 Thanks.
さよなら。
Right.
Goodbye, baby.
Oh, they're great.
What is your message to the world?
natural lifestyle equals planetary ecology.
If you don't know who you want to be, somebody will tell you who to be.
I'm not a person that's ever been identified as a spiritual type. In fact, someone recently described me as being thoroughly secular. But I know what dawn standing on the beach feels like. And I know what standing on a mountain feels like. And those feelings are that you are totally involved with the rest of the universe. And the fact that you are totally involved with the rest of the universe, and you only realize it some of the time. The rest of the time you're doing interviews, or you're writing, or you're walking, or you're trying to remember what to buy at the store, or whatever you're doing. You're part of the infinite universe, and that is the as high as we get. That's it. That's the sacred part of all of us.
Being useful, really important. There needs to be a new idea, or a more fleshed out idea of what a human being is in reference to sharing the biosphere with other life. The current notion of that, even in its most benevolent form, is inadequate to the problem. The problem is always put at the fringe of social, political, economic considerations. It's got to move not only more toward the center, it's got to become the center. So ecological identity of a human being has to become the central identity of a human being in order to get through the crisis that we're presently involved with. How are we going to get from the present idea of a person who is consuming resources and creating a garbage planet to a person who is interdependent with other species and the natural processes of the biosphere? Now, people are dying for Islam, and dying for Christianity. Oh, how about dying for what's killing us? I have grandchildren. You know, I have a granddaughter. I have an 11-year-old granddaughter who is in love with nature. I want her to have children. I want her to prosper.
Miraculous world. miraculous world.